Welcome back to Drowsy History, the channel where the past becomes a place to rest. Tonight, you're crossing an ocean. You are one of the 12 million, the steamship passengers who sailed into New York Harbor between 1892 and 1924 and stepped onto a small island with a very big door. Tonight, you'll climb the famous stairs, face the 6-second doctors, answer the 29 questions, and learn the truth behind the most famous myth in American family history. No, they did not change your name at Ellis Island. What actually happened is stranger and far more interesting. Before we set sail, if these long, quiet journeys into the past help you drift off, take a moment to subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel, and it means you'll never lose your place in history. And tonight's comment question is one this channel was practically made for. Leave a comment with your family's coming to America story. Who made the journey? Where did they sail from? And what name did they carry? Nearly half of all Americans have an ancestor who passed through the very rooms you're about to enter. And if your family's arrival story is lost to time, or your family never crossed at all, simply tell us where in the world you're listening from tonight. Reading these is one of the best parts of making these videos. Now, dim the lights. Pull the blanket up like a wool coat against the sea wind. Let the mattress sway, just a little, like a bunk below the waterline. It is the spring of 1907, the busiest year in the history of American immigration, and you are almost there. Before the ocean, there was the road, and the road deserves its own chapter, because for many of the 12 million, getting to the ship was half the journey and most of the goodbyes. It began often with a piece of paper, perhaps a letter, one of the famous America letters that circulated through the villages of Europe like scripture, read aloud at firesides and passed farm to farm until the creases wore through, with their reports of wages that sounded invented and folded inside the proof that they were not. A money order, or the most powerful document in the world in these years, a prepaid steamship ticket bought at an agency in New York or Chicago by a brother or a father already there, and mailed home across the ocean like a hand reaching back. A third of the people on your ship, or more, are traveling on tickets bought in America. The crossing for them began as an envelope, and where the letters didn't reach, the agents did. The great steamship lines blanketed Europe with them, thousands of ticket agents scattered through the towns and villages, posting bright lithographs of four-funneled liners on the walls of taverns and markets in every language of the continent. The poster in your village square showed a ship like a floating city and a harbor with a green statue, and named a price. And the price, that was the astonishing part, was survivable. A few years' careful saving, a cow, sold, a strip of land mortgaged to a cousin. The agents wrote it all down, took deposits, answered the same questions 1,000 times. Immigration in this decade is not a leap into the void. It is an industry, organized down to the last handbill, and your family weighing it at the kitchen table through one long winter was its customer. Then came the leaving, which no industry could organize, the last Sunday at the old church, the rounds of the relatives, house by house, each visit ending the same way. The bundle and the basket packed and repacked, the quilt argued over and won, the photographs taken stiffly against a painted backdrop, one print to travel, one to stay, and then the morning itself, at a rail platform or a crossroads, when the cart was loaded and the neighbors assembled, and whole villages learned what their own weeping sounded like. Everyone in steerage with you carries that morning. It is the one piece of baggage no inspector will ever ask to see. The road itself could run for days. From the interior of the continent, emigrants funneled toward the port cities along iron rivers of rail, third and fourth class carriages, filling station by station with families and bundles and one shared destination. And at certain borders, the journey passed through a strange rehearsal of everything waiting in New York. Control stations at the frontier, where westbound immigrants were stopped, questioned, examined by doctors, and, most memorably, steamed. Baggage went into fumigation chambers, travelers filed through washrooms and inspections, papers were checked against lists. The German lines ran these frontier stations in cooperation with their government, terrified of cholera crossing Europe in an emigrant's bundle. And so, hundreds of miles from any ocean, you got your first taste of being processed. The queue, the doctor's glance, the stamp, the odd new feeling of being simultaneously a person and a paperwork. The ports themselves had become emigrant cities. At Bremerhaven and Hamburg, at Naples and Rotterdam and Liverpool, the steamship companies built entire villages for their waiting passengers, dormitories and dining halls, churches and synagogues, kosher kitchens and delousing baths and infirmaries, where you might lodge for days at the company's charge while your ship coaled and your papers ripened. Hamburg's emigrant halls could sleep thousands, a rehearsal Ellis on the wrong side of the ocean, complete with its own inspections. Because here, as you already know, came the examination that really decided things. The company's own doctors at the pier, checking eyes and scalps and papers, with American rejection fines concentrating their minds wonderfully. Vaccinations were administered to arms that had never seen a needle. Tickets were stamped, manifests inked line by line, your name entering at this very counter the document that will follow you all the way to a tall desk in a vaulted hall. And then, at last, the morning of the ship, the quay a canyon of riveted steel, the gangways streaming, the four funnels overhead vaster than any building in your province, handkerchiefs by the thousand, and the deep, chest-shaking voice of the whistle, saying the one word every language on the pier understood, now. The land you were born on slid backward, thinned to a line, and dissolved, and around you on the crowded afterdeck, 1,000 people watched it go, each holding their own last Sunday, their own platform morning, their own envelope with the ticket that started it all. The road was behind you. Ahead lay only water, and the doorway on the far side of it. Begin with the part of the story that is already almost over, the ocean. You have been on it for what feels like a very long time. 2 weeks ago, or 10 days, or 12, depending on the ship and the weather, you stood on a pier in another world. Perhaps it was Naples, with the volcano smoking softly over your shoulder and your whole village's worth of goodbyes still ringing in your ears. Perhaps it was Bremen or Hamburg at the end of a train journey that began in a small town whose name no American official will ever learn to pronounce. Perhaps it was Liverpool, or Rotterdam, or Piraeus, or the harbor at Queenstown where the tenders come out to meet the great ships riding at anchor. 12 million people will make this crossing through the Golden Door, and they will start from 1,000 different piers, but the piers all share one thing. On every one of them, somebody wept. You travel steerage, like nearly everyone in this story. Your ticket cost somewhere between $25 and $35, the savings of years, or the gift of a brother who went ahead, whose letters home have been read aloud so many times, the paper has gone soft at the folds. Steerage means the lowest decks, down near the waterline and the engines, great open compartments or narrow cabins packed with iron bunks in tiers, a straw mattress, a life belt that doubles as a pillow, and several hundred of your closest strangers. The air down there is a thing your descendants' history books will struggle to describe politely: salt, engine oil, disinfectant, seasickness, and humanity, all stewed together with the porthole shut. You spend as little time in it as the weather allows. Up on the steerage deck, in the wind, is where the crossing actually happens. Women wrapped in shawls, trading bread and rumors, men comparing the addresses sewn into their coat linings, a concertina somewhere aft, children turning the deck into the village square their parents just left. Rumors are the ship's true cargo. Everyone aboard is carrying the same handful of facts about what waits in New York, polished smooth by retelling. They will look at your eyes. Have your money ready. Don't cough, whatever you do, and whatever else happens, when the doctors watch you walk, walk well. Because here is the strange truth you already half understand, somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic. Your inspection has, in a sense, already begun. It began before you ever boarded. By law, the steamship company must carry back, at its own expense, anyone America refuses, and pay a fine besides for bringing them. So the company examined you at the pier before it ever sold you passage in earnest. A doctor at the dock in Naples or Bremen looked at your eyes and your papers and your gait and stamped you fit to sail. The shipping lines have quietly become the first line of American immigration control, an ocean away from America. The great sieve has many layers, and you have already passed through the first of them. The ones that remain are the ones everyone whispers about. At night, in the bunk, with the engines throbbing through the steel like a great iron heartbeat, you do the arithmetic every emigrant does. What you left, the rent that could never be paid down, the land that could never be yours, the army that wanted your sons, the troubles. Each passenger has their own word for the thing behind them. What you carry, the address in the coat lining, the names of the ones who went ahead, a bundle, a basket, a feather quilt your grandmother made and refused to let you leave behind, and a sum of money counted so many times you could count it in your sleep. What you were promised, that in America work is real, and wages are real, and a person can begin again. You are not naive about it. The letters from ahead told the truth. The work is hard, the rooms are crowded, the streets are not paved with gold. The streets, one joke already crossing the ocean goes, are not paved at all, and you are the one expected to pave them. But the letters also enclosed money orders. That part was not a rumor. The proof came folded inside the envelope. And then, on some gray gold morning in your second week, the engines change their note. The word goes through the lower decks faster than any bell could carry it, in a dozen languages at once, and every one of them means the same thing: land. Since we have a few days of ocean left, let us properly explore the world you're crossing it in, because a steamship in 1907 is not merely a vehicle, It is a floating village of 2,000 souls, with districts and customs and an economy all its own, and steerage is its largest neighborhood. Meals come first because meals organize the day. On the older ships and the older lines, steerage feeding is a communal affair with the elegance of a field kitchen. Great kettles carried down from the galley, and passengers queuing with the tin plate, tin cup, and spoon that came with the ticket or from home. The famous steerage kit that many families will keep decades hence in the back of American cupboards, unable to throw away the spoon that crossed the ocean. The menu is repetitive but real: soup, boiled beef or fish, potatoes eternal, bread and butter, herring in honor of half the passenger list, prunes for reasons no one questions, tea and coffee by the urn. Newer ships on the better lines are already civilizing the arrangement. Actual dining rooms below, long tables with benches, stewards serving, even the occasional white tablecloth, because the emigrant trade is the most profitable cargo afloat, and the lines have discovered that word of decent food sells tickets in 1,000 villages. On any ship, the observant keep their own commissary. Bundles yield hard sausage, dark bread, cheese and cloth, supplies laid in by mothers who trusted no kitchen they hadn't met. Seasickness is the village's shared weather. It arrives with the first real swell, somewhere past the harbor bar, and levels all nations impartially. For a day or three, the lower decks are a groaning chorus, and the rails above are lined with sufferers studying the horizon as instructed by every helpful veteran aboard. Then, mysteriously, it lifts. The village finds its sea legs all together, and appetite returns with a vengeance the galley has been warned about. Storms are a different matter. When the real weather comes, steerage is battened below, hatches closed, and the village rides it out in the swinging lamplight, bunks creaking in long rows, mothers turning the ship's plunges into a game for the little ones, someone praying aloud in one corner, and someone snoring magnificently in another, until the sea eases, the hatches open, and the whole neighborhood pours up into the washed air to inspect the ocean that tried them. Between meals and weather, the village lives. On the steerage deck, your one outdoor territory, aft where the engines shake the rail and the coal smoke sometimes rains a fine soot, the days assemble themselves into something almost like a fair. The concertina and the fiddle come out of their wrappings. There is dancing on fair evenings, reels and zardas and tarantellas on the same 30 feet of planking, nations taking turns with the deck the way villages share a green. Men play cards on hatch covers for matchsticks and honor. Women knit their way across the Atlantic and conduct, in the universal language of gesture and offered bread, the diplomacy of the rail, recipes exchanged without a common word, babies admired in every tongue at once. Rumors circulate like currency and are inflated like it, about the I-men, about the 29 questions, about the cousin of a man on the last crossing who was asked to count backward. An English practice breaks out everywhere, little knots of passengers drilling each other from phrase books gone soft as old money. How do you do? I am a tailor. I go to my brother Mulberry Street, thank you. America? The village even has its landmarks and its news. A passing liner, eastbound, sets the whole rail waving at strangers waving back, people going the other way, a thing the deck finds quietly hilarious and slightly unimaginable. A pod of dolphins riding the bow wave, will be discussed for 2 days, and threading down from the masthead comes the modern miracle nobody in your grandmother's village would believe: the wireless, crackling messages between ships and shore, so that the ship's little printed news sheet can report, in mid ocean, the doings of the world you're sailing toward. The old people aboard shake their heads at it. The ocean their parents crossed in sailing ships took 6 weeks and swallowed all news whole. This one takes 10 days and gossips the entire way. And on the last full day, the village transforms. Word passes that land will come with morning, and steerage becomes one vast preparation. The washrooms, a few basins for a multitude, cold salt water, and a bar of ship's soap, run a queue from dawn. Razors and scissors emerge. The good clothes, pressed flat at the bottom of bundles since Bremen or Naples, are shaken out and brushed and buttoned onto children who are then forbidden to move. Boots are blacked with stove polish and spit. Documents are counted, then counted again, then redistributed among coat linings, according to strategies debated all evening. Nobody sleeps properly. The bunks murmur half the night in every language of Europe, the same conversation in all of them, half plans, half prayers. Above the ceiling of the steerage, the engines hold their deep note, spending the last of the ocean, and the village that formed itself out of strangers 10 days ago lies in the dark together, one night from the rail and the haze and the word that will empty every bunk before dawn. The steerage deck fills before dawn. It doesn't matter that there is nothing to see yet but haze. Nobody is going to be below when it happens. Families press along the rail in the wet wind, children riding on shoulders, everyone's best clothes already on, because today of all days, you will not be met looking like the crossing felt. First comes the low green smudge of the outer lands, and the harbor pilot climbing aboard from his little boat, the first American any of you have ever seen, received like a visiting head of state by 500 pairs of staring eyes. Then the Narrows, the great gate of the harbor, with forts on either hand. And then the ship slows and stops and does the one thing nobody at the rail can bear. It waits. This is quarantine. Before any vessel may enter New York, doctors of the health service come aboard at anchor to make sure the ship carries no epidemic. The old terrors, cholera, smallpox, yellow fever. They check the crew, the cabins, the steerage compartments. A yellow flag flies until the ship is passed. For an hour or two, the whole harbor holds its breath. The old hands on the crew move through the decks saying it in every language they've picked up across 100 crossings. Routine, routine. It is almost always routine. The ship swings slowly at anchor. New York glitters through the haze just out of reach, and 12 million hearts over the years pound in exactly this spot. Then the flag comes down, the anchor comes up, and the harbor opens like a book. And there she is. You have seen her before, of course, on the posters in the steamship office, on a postcard pinned over a cousin's bed, in the newspapers that cross the ocean the other way. But nothing has prepared you for the size of her or the color, that pale sea green of weathered copper, or the way she seems to turn toward the ship as you pass, torch up, face calm, close enough now to see the folds of her robe and the broken chain at her feet that nobody mentioned in the letters. The deck around you goes quiet first and then very loud. People weep without noticing they are doing it. Men take off their hats, not entirely sure why, and hold them over their hearts in a gesture they seem to be inventing on the spot. Mothers hold babies up over the rail. Remember this? You were here. To eyes that will not remember, toward a statue that will still be standing when those babies' great grandchildren sail past her on party boats. For the rest of your life, whatever else happens in it, you will be able to close your eyes and stand in this exact spot on this deck. Ask anyone who was there. It is the one part of the journey that nobody ever forgets, and nobody ever describes the same way twice. Beyond her, Manhattan stands up out of the water, and this too defeats the postcards. The towers at the tip of the island climb 20 stories and more, stacked like cliffs, with smoke and steam unraveling from their tops, and the harbor before them is not water so much as traffic. Ferries crossing tugs, crossing barges, crossing liners, sails and funnels together, whistles answering whistles, the whole scene in constant motion like a pot at full boil. Somewhere in the middle distance, small and low and almost modest, sits a brick building with 4 domed towers on a little island, and the old hands at the rail point it out, and the name moves through the crowd, and everyone falls quiet again, in a different way this time. But here is something the movie's 400 miles of film will get wrong. The ship does not sail to Ellis Island. The great liner is far too big for that little harbor. She steams instead up the Hudson to the piers of Manhattan or Hoboken and ties up there, among the great sheds, with the city roaring right there at the end of the gangway. Close enough to smell the coal smoke and the horses, close enough to hear it. And then comes the sorting that tells you everything about the world you've just entered. The first and second class passengers, the ones who crossed the same ocean on the same ship several decks above you, are met in their staterooms or the saloon by a courteous inspector, asked a few polite questions, and walked down the gangway onto the pier, into America, done. No island, no great hall, no lines. A cabin ticket, it turns out, is also a ticket around Ellis Island, on the sensible theory that anyone who can afford a stateroom is unlikely to become a public charge, and, less officially, on the ancient theory that rules are for steerage. You are steerage. For you, at the foot of the gangway, there waits not the city, but a barge, broad, low, crowded, and pointed back out into the harbor toward the little island with the 4 towers. A ferry ride of a mile or 2, and a doorway 3,000 miles wide. You take a breath, take your bundle, take a child's hand, down the gangway, toward the barge, and the island, and the door. Before you ever leave the pier, America pins a number on you. A steamship official moves down the crowded deck with a sheaf of paper tags and a mouthful of pins, and fastens one to your coat, and to every coat, every shawl, every child's collar in the crowd. On the tags, the name of your ship and 2 numbers. The first is the page of the ship's manifest, the great list compiled back at the departure port, on which your name and your whole paper life are written. The second is your line on that page. From this moment until you walk out the far side of Ellis Island, you are, administratively speaking, your ship, your page, and your line. Hold on to that tag the interpreters call out in 6 languages, as if anyone needed telling. People clutch them like train tickets to the rest of their lives, and that is, more or less, exactly what they are. Then comes the barge, and with it a lesson In the first great law of Ellis Island, everything takes longer than you think it will, and everyone waits together. In this peak season, ships arrive faster than the island can swallow them. On the big days, and 1907 is a year made entirely of big days, the barges line up off the island like carts outside a mill, loaded to the rails with tagged and bundled humanity, waiting for space at the slips. An hour, 2 hours, on the worst days, longer still, packed shoulder to shoulder on open water in whatever weather the harbor is serving. You are close enough now to see the island in detail: the pale red brick, the limestone trim, the four domed towers with their eagles, the American flag straining on its pole, close enough to see the door itself under its great canopy, and the dark river of people flowing steadily into it from the barge ahead of yours. Somebody in the crowd starts a song from home, low, and half the barge hums along, and the harbor slaps patiently at the hull, and you wait, watching the door, while the door, in its way, watches you. Then it is your barge at the slip, your gangplank, your turn, and the current takes you. Under the canopy, the crowd narrows into a moving stream, and the first thing America asks of you is your baggage. In the ground floor baggage room, a vast, echoing hall already mountainous with the belongings of nations, attendants urge everyone to check their bundles and cases and collect them afterward. All around you, the great negotiation begins. Trunks and wicker baskets, carpet bags and sea chests, bedrolls and washtubs, and everywhere the feather beds, the great goose-down quilts of Europe, folded and roped, carried on heads and shoulders across a continent and an ocean, because whatever else the New World holds, a person's own bed is not left behind. Some families surrender their worldly goods to the baggage checks. Many do not, will not, and you understand them completely. Everything such a family owns is in those bundles, and the bundles have made it this far in their owner's arms. So the line that forms at the foot of the staircase is a line of people wearing their luggage, baskets on backs, babies on hips, feather beds on heads, tag numbers fluttering. And at the foot of that staircase, though no sign says so, the examinations of the United States of America has already quietly begun. The stairs rise straight ahead of you, wide, worn, and busy as a mill race, and they climb toward a sound. You hear the registry room before you see it. It comes down the stairwell like weather, the sound of several thousand people from 40 nations, all talking at once under one enormous roof, layered over shuffling feet and crying babies, and the clang of gates, and cutting through it at intervals, the voices of inspectors and interpreters calling out ship names and manifest numbers. Every person who ever climbed these stairs remembers the sound. They will describe it decades from now, sitting with their grandchildren, like the ocean, some will say, like a market square the size of a city, like Babel, say the ones who know their scripture, Babel with the ceiling on. And then you reach the top, and the great hall opens over you like a second sky. It is one of the largest rooms you have ever stood in, one of the largest rooms in America, for that matter, 200 feet long, 100 wide, with a vaulted ceiling nearly 60 feet overhead, and tall arched windows through which the harbor light comes pouring in on the dust and the noise. Through those windows, as you shuffle forward, you can see her, the statue, green against the gray water, keeping an eye on things. The room below is ruled into long lanes by iron railings, like a great tidy machine for combing crowds straight, and down every lane moves a line of tagged and bundled people exactly like you, inching toward the far end, where inspectors wait at tall desks like schoolmasters at the gates of paradise. Take a moment while the line creeps to notice who else is in this room, because the Great Hall holds far more than immigrants. Interpreters move along the lanes, young men in uniform caps who slide between languages the way other people change hats. The island's staff can muster dozens of tongues among them, and a good interpreter here can tell not just Italian, but which Italy, not just the language, but the province, from 3 words and a vowel. One of them in these very years is a short, tireless young man named Fiorello LaGuardia, working his way through law school on Italian, German, and Croatian. The immigrants he translates for cannot know that they are being welcomed to New York by a future mayor of it. There are matrons in long skirts keeping watch over women traveling alone. There are missionaries and aid society workers wearing armbands and badges, Hebrew immigrant aid, Italian welfare leagues, church societies of every stripe, moving through the crowd with the addresses of boarding houses and the answers to 1,000 frightened questions. And up on the balcony that rings the room, visitors and officials look down at the floor of nations the way people look down into a harbor. One more thing about this room, and then the line will have carried you to the head of it. All around you, wedged into the crowd, are the veterans, the ones making the crossing for the second or third time, going home and coming back with the seasons, and they narrate the hall to the first timers with the weary authority of commuters. It goes quick once you're at the desks, they say. Answer plain, same as the ship list. Don't volunteer, don't embroider. And their calmest, most repeated piece of wisdom, passed down the lanes in every language like the room's own psalm. Nearly everybody passes. You've heard the terrible stories. Everyone has. But look around you, they say. This whole river of people, 5,000 today, and nearly every soul of it will sleep on the mainland. The island is a door, not a wall. Keep your tag on. Keep your children close. Keep moving. The line creeps. The great room roars softly. And now you can see what stands between you and the inspector's desks. A handful of men in the uniforms of the United States Public Health Service, standing at the head of the lanes with their hands behind their backs, doing something that looks, at first glance, like nothing at all. They are watching people walk. Here is a number that will astonish your descendants. On a busy day, Ellis Island's doctors must examine as many as 5,000 human beings. There are, at any given time, only a few dozen medical officers on the island, and only a handful stationed here, on the line. Divide the day by the crowd, and you arrive at the most famous arithmetic in the island's history. Each doctor has, for each arriving person, about 6 seconds. 6 seconds. And so the Public Health Service has refined the strangest medical examination ever devised. The doctors have learned to read walking bodies the way tailors read cloth. They watched you, though you didn't know it, as you climbed the long stairs from the baggage room. The stairs are part of the exam. That is why the doctors stand where they do. A climb with a heavy bundle is a stress test 3 decades before anyone will call it that. It shows the laboring heart, the troubled lung, the hidden lameness, the weakness a person can conceal, standing still but never on stairs with a feather bed on their head. Now, at the head of the lane, they watch you approach. Your gait, your color, your breathing, your eyes, the way you hold your head, the way you set down a child and pick it up again. They make you turn, sometimes, to see you from another angle. A doctor may say a few words through the interpreter, not really for the answers, but to watch your face while you answer. Most people are past in those 6 seconds and never realize they were examined at all. But some are not, and for them, the doctor's hand comes up holding a piece of chalk. One letter marked on the shoulder or lapel of your coat, and the lane forks, the chalked step out of the stream into side rooms for a real examination, unhurried and thorough. The letters are a whole alphabet of concern. H for heart, L for lameness, E for eyes, SC for scalp, PG where a pregnancy is suspected, X for the mind. To stand in the great hall is to see them scattered through the crowd. A man with a chalked shoulder gone quiet, a wife carrying his bundle and walking beside him, saying the sensible things. And here, because this channel tells you the truth, even at bedtime, is the honest shape of what the chalk meant. For most, it meant delay, not disaster. An examination in a quiet room, a question resolved, a letter brushed off a coat, a family reunited on the far side of the railings, an hour behind schedule. For some, it meant the island's hospital and days or weeks of care. We will visit those wards later tonight, and they are not the darkest rooms in this story. They may be the kindest. And for a few, a very few, far fewer than the whispered stories on the ship, the chalk was the beginning of the hardest news in the world. We will not look away from them when we come to that part of the night, but hold on to the true proportions as the line carries you forward. Of the thousands crossing this floor today, 98 in every 100 will walk out the far door free. The 6-second doctors are not hunting for reasons to turn you back. Mostly in 6 seconds, they are looking for people who need help, and it is a plain fact of the record that the same service that chalked the coats also ran on the islands next door, one of the great hospitals of the age, and filled it with the very strangers it had marked. One examination remains, and it is the one the whole ship whispered about, the eye men. At the end of the doctor's gauntlet stand the officers everyone on board warned you of, the ones checking person by person for trachoma, a contagious disease of the eyelids that in this century can take a person's sight, and one of the few conditions the law counts as an automatic bar. The examination is brief and bracing. The doctor tips your chin up, and with practiced fingers or a small instrument, the emigrant grapevine has already made infamous. A buttonhook, the same little tool that fastens your Sunday boots, everts each eyelid for one quick look, and it is over. It is uncomfortable. It is over in a few heartbeats. Grown men on the ship rehearsed for this moment. Mothers coached children not to flinch. And up and down the line you can see people, the instant they are passed, break into the broadest smiles of the whole journey. The eye men nod you on. The chalk stays in the doctor's pocket. You gather your bundle, take the small, warm hand beside you, and step out of the medical lines with the two most valuable words on the island, passed, unmarked, written nowhere but meaning everything. Ahead, at the tall desks, under the flags, wait the inspectors, the manifest, and the 29 questions. But before the line delivers you to those desks, notice something moving against the current of the crowd. A trim, mustached man in clerk's clothes, carrying, of all things on this island of bundles, a camera. His name is Augustus Sherman, and officially he is one of the island's senior clerks, a man of manifests and correspondence. Unofficially, on his own time, he is compiling one of the great portrait galleries in American history. Sherman has the run of the island and an eye for the astonishing fact at the center of this place that the whole world, in its own clothes, walks through this hall every single day. And so he asks, through the interpreters, with a clerk's courtesy, and the world, it turns out, is willing to pose. A Romanian shepherd in a sheepskin cloak, vast as weather. Dutch children in wooden shoes, lined up by height like a stairway of solemnity. A Ruthenian farm wife in embroidery it took a winter to sew. A Cossack in full fig, a Norwegian girl with braids to her waist, holding the island's plain bench like a throne. Many of his sitters are detainees with a day to spare between hearings, and they meet the lens with the unhurried, level gaze of people who have crossed an ocean and are not about to be flustered by a box on a tripod. Sherman prints his portraits, labels them in clerk's ink, and pins the finest around the offices, so that the walls of the island's bureaucracy slowly fill with the faces of the very humanity it processes, gazing down at the paperwork in national dress. He is not the only one watching this hall through a lens. In these same years, a young teacher named Lewis Hine ferries out from Manhattan with his students and his camera on a mission he phrases with a teacher's plainness. He wants his pupils and his country to look at these arrivals with the same respect they'd give the passengers of the Mayflower. Hine works the great hall gently, asking, waiting, catching what the 6-second doctors and the 2-minute inspectors have no time to record. A Madonna-faced mother resting against her bundles in a shaft of window light. A family regrouping at the foot of the stairs, counting itself. The particular tilt of a man's head as he listens to his own future being translated. Between the clerk with the portrait eye and the teacher with the conscience, this one room in this one decade becomes among the most tenderly photographed places on earth, and a century on, when your descendants imagine immigration itself, the pictures in their minds will mostly have been taken here, in the light of these very windows, by these two patient men, and what faces they had to work with. Consider who is actually in this crowd with you, not the famous, for nobody here is famous yet, but the about to be. A few seasons before tonight, a 5-year-old from a Russian cantor's family came through these halls in the crush of 1893. America will know him as Irving Berlin, and he will write the country's most beloved songs about itself, including one that asks God to bless it. That same year, a Norwegian boy of 5 named Knut Rockne passed the desks, bound for Chicago, and eventually for the transformation of American football. The year before your crossing, 1903, a 6-year-old from Sicily named Frank Capra stood somewhere in these lanes, clutching his mother's skirt. He will grow up to direct the very movies through which the nation dreams about itself, wonderful lives and all. A season after tonight, a 4-year-old English boy called Leslie Hope will bob through the great hall in a family of 7. Give him a new first name, Bob, and half a century, and he'll have made more Americans laugh than any man alive. And years on, near the era's end, A 3-year-old from a Russian village, Isaac Asimov, will toddle across this same floor toward a Brooklyn candy store and a future in which he explains the entire universe, 500 books worth, in the plainest English ever written. None of them will remember this room. That is the almost unbearable sweetness of it. The hall's most famous alumni crossed it asleep on shoulders, or fretting about a lost mitten, futures folded invisibly inside them like letters in a coat lining. The inspectors who landed them noted a name, an age, a destination, 2 minutes next, please, and had no way on earth of knowing. And that, you understand, as the line shuffles you forward past Sherman and his tripod, is the real photograph of Ellis Island. Not any single famous face, but the odds themselves. 5,000 people will cross this floor today. Statistically, nearly all of them will live the anonymous, load-bearing lives that nations are actually made of. The seamstresses and track layers, the pushcart men and foundry hands, the mothers of the mothers of the mothers of people not yet imaginable. And scattered invisibly among them, indistinguishable in the crowd, walk the songwriters and scientists, the coaches and comedians, the future's whole unannounced cast, carrying it all through this vaulted, roaring, patient room without so much as a chalk mark to show for it. Sherman clicks his shutter. The line moves. Somewhere behind you, a baby who will outlive the century objects, briefly, to everything. And now the line delivers you to the desks. The line delivers you at last to the foot of a tall desk, and behind the desk stands an immigration inspector of the United States, and beside him an interpreter, and open on the desk between them, the object around which this entire island revolves, the manifest. Understand what this document is, because your descendants mostly won't. The manifest is not being written here. It was written weeks ago, an ocean away, at the port where you boarded, filled out by the steamship company, line by line, passenger by passenger, from your answers and your papers, in accordance with American law. Your name is already on it. Your age, your village, your trade, your destination, the relative who paid your passage, the cousin waiting on Orchard Street, all of it, already inked in its columns, page such and such, line such and such, the very numbers pinned to your coat. The inspector's job is not to discover who you are. His job is to check you against the book of who you said you were, to hold the paper version of you up beside the living one and see that they match. And so begin the questions, 29 of them on the standard list of these years, though a brisk inspector rarely needs them all. What is your name? How old are you? Are you married or single? What is your calling or occupation? Can you read? Can you write? What country do you come from? What town? Who paid for your passage? Have you ever been in prison or an almshouse? Are you a polygamist? A question that startles a laugh out of half the hall. Are you an anarchist? Have you a job already waiting for you in the United States? Where are you going? Who is meeting you? How much money do you carry? And then, the courtroom flourish that veterans of the crossing warn everyone about. Show it to me. Here is the strangest thing about this famous interrogation. On an ordinary day, for an ordinary passenger whose answers match the manifest, the whole thing takes about 2 minutes. The inspector has hundreds of people to land before supper. He is not conducting a philosophy seminar. Name matches, age matches. Going to a brother on Mulberry Street matches the manifest, matches the letter in your hand with the address on it. Money, shown, counted, sufficient. The interpreter carries your words up to the desk and the inspector's words down, smoothing the seams between languages so skillfully that many arrivals will remember the inspector himself as having spoken their tongue. A pause, a look, the long, practiced, not unkind look of a man who has seen 100,000 faces and learned to read the honest ones at sight. Then the stamp, or the initials, or the simple tick in the ledger, and the words in your own language, because the interpreter gives them to you like a gift. You may go. Welcome to America. 2 minutes. Your descendants will imagine this desk as the scene of trick questions and trembling hours. The trick questions existed. An inspector who suspected a rehearsed story might loop back, ask the same thing twice in different clothes, watch for the answers to wobble. The trembling was real. Every memoir of this room remembers the dry mouth and the pounding heart. But the proportions were merciful. The overwhelming majority of the day's thousands passed the desks as you just did, briskly, plainly, and successfully, and are pointed onward toward the stairs at the far end of the hall, where the rest of America begins. Some, of course, are not waved through, the answers that don't match, the money that isn't enough, the young woman whose fiancé hasn't arrived yet, the family whose chalked grandfather is still with the doctors. For them, the inspector writes the 2 letters that mean not no, but not yet, S.I., special inquiry, and they are guided gently enough out of the stream and into the island's slower rooms, the detention quarters, the hearing rooms, the dormitories, and dining hall we will visit before the night is out. Hold them in your mind, because their evenings on the island are part of this story too. But you, your answers matched, your money counted, your eyes clear. You are through, past the desk, off the manifest and on to the continent. And it is exactly here, at this desk, at this moment, that the most famous story in American family history is supposed to have happened. So before you take another step, let us stop in the roar of the great hall and finally settle it. You have heard the story. Everyone has heard the story. It is told at 100,000 American dinner tables, and it goes like this. Our name wasn't always our name. When great-grandfather came through Ellis Island, the inspector couldn't understand him, or couldn't spell it, or couldn't be bothered, and he wrote down something shorter, something easier, something American. And that, children, is why we are called what we are called. It is a beloved story. It is told with laughter in some families, and with a flicker of old grief in others. And here is the truth of it, as plainly as it can be said. It almost never happened, and at this desk, in this hall, it essentially could not happen. You have already seen why, tonight, with your own eyes. Think about what the inspector is actually doing at that tall desk. He is not writing your name down. He is reading it off a manifest composed at the port of departure by shipping clerks working from your own documents and your own mouth, very often in your own country and your own language. The inspector's entire task is to find you on that list and confirm you match it. He has no form on which to invent a new name for you, no blank line waiting for his improvisation, and no reason on earth to create a person who does not appear in the ship's papers. His whole job is matching people to the book. If your name is misspelled anywhere in this process, it happened at a steamship office in Europe weeks ago, and even then, what got mangled was ink, not identity. And standing beside the desk, in the place where the legend puts a baffled monolingual bureaucrat, you have seen what is actually there. An interpreter, often an immigrant himself or the son of immigrants, often fluent in the very dialect of the very province you left. The island was staffed top to bottom with people hired precisely because they could understand you. So, where did all the changed names actually come from? Because the names did change. That part of every family's story is perfectly true. Millions of them changed. They just didn't change here. They changed at kitchen tables in the years after this island, when a tailor discovered that customers stumbled over the old name and the shop sign was easier to pay for with fewer letters. They changed at factory gates, where a foreman who couldn't pronounce a name simply issued a new one with the time card, and the new one stuck because the pay envelope had it. They changed in schoolyards, where children came home announcing the name the teacher had decided on and kept it because children want nothing on this earth so much as to match the other children. They changed at night school citizenship classes and at the naturalization office, where, years from tonight, a person swearing allegiance could take the opportunity to choose, legally and on purpose, the name their American life had already been using for a decade. Sometimes the change was a shrug, a spelling simplified, a cluster of consonants sanded smooth. Sometimes it was armor in years when certain names cost their owners jobs and leases. And sometimes it was a declaration, a person standing in a new country, deciding for themselves, with full deliberation, who they intended to be in it. That it's the real story hiding inside the myth, and it is worth a moment under this vaulted ceiling, because it is at once sadder and prouder than the legend. The legend says, America renamed us at the door, and we had no say. The record says something different. The record says the door let you in, carrying exactly the name your family had carried for generations, and that what happened afterward was the long, complicated, painful, hopeful negotiation between that name and this country, conducted not by an inspector in 6 seconds, but by your own family across 30 years. The new name wasn't stamped on you. It was chosen, under pressure, yes, half the time, but chosen, which means the old name wasn't taken either. In the manifests of this island, preserved all of them, and waiting, it is still there, spelled the way your grandmother spelled it, on its page and its line, holding your place. Some night, 100 years from tonight, your great great granddaughter will type that name into a glowing screen, and the manifest will rise up out of the archive, and there you will be, your name, your age, your village, your ship, this very day in 1907. She will read your line to her children, stumbling a little over the letters the family let go of long ago. That is where the name went. It didn't die at Ellis Island. It waited there. We are halfway through the night now, and you are halfway across the great hall, passed by the doctors, passed at the desks, your name intact and your papers in your fist. So here is tonight's question, resting exactly where it belongs. What is the name in your family's manifest? The old spelling, the one from the ship list, the one from before the schoolyards and the shop signs. If you know it, leave it in the comments tonight, and where it sailed from, so it gets said again. And if the old name is lost, or your family's crossing was a different crossing, just tell us where you're listening from. Then settle down deep because you still have to collect your baggage, change your money, find your train, and somewhere on this island, at a post everyone calls by the same sweet nickname, someone may be waiting for you. The door you walked through tonight, the 6 seconds, the 29 questions, the tightrope of money and work, is the door as it stood in 1907. But the door was never still. Its rules were rewritten, decade by decade, in a running argument the country held with itself about who the Golden Door was for. And to really know Ellis Island, you should watch the rulebook grow. In the beginning, astonishingly, there was almost no rulebook at all. For most of the 19th century, the United States had no meaningful federal immigration law. You arrived, you landed, you were in the door, less a door than an open harbor. The first federal restrictions arrived in the 1880s, and they were a short and pointed list. No convicts, no one deemed insane or unable to care for themselves, and the phrase you met at the inspector's desk, destined to carry more weight than any other. No person likely to become a public charge. A head tax of 50 cents funded the inspections. That was the whole toll at the Golden Door, half a dollar and a clean record. Then, law by law, the list grew. The Contract Labor Acts of the mid-1880s added the strange rule you know intimately: no imported laborers with jobs already promised. The Great Law of 1891, the one that built federal immigration itself and commissioned this island, added the medical bars and the crucial enforcement trick behind them, making the steamship companies pay to carry back their rejected passengers, which conscripted every shipping line on Earth into pre-screening at the piers of Europe. After a president fell to an assassin's bullet in 1901, the rules reached for the first time into the realm of belief, barring anarchists, which is why, in that vaulted hall, a farm wife from the Carpathians solemnly assured the United States government that she was not one. The head tax climbed with the years, $1, $2, $4 by the time of your crossing, a real sum folded into the ticket price so that every arrival quite literally paid for the machinery inspecting them. Some of the rules, seen from your bunk tonight, are simply strange. A polygamy bar, inserted in the 1890s, gave the 29 questions their most reliable moment of levity. A provision against importing women for immoral purposes stood behind the matron's vigilance and the fiancé interrogations you witnessed. Court decisions sorted arriving humanity into categories with the confidence of an age that believed in categories. And it must be said honestly, the rulebook carried the prejudices of its authors. On the far coast, an entire nation's laborers had been barred by name since 1882, and the door you walked through so briskly stood, effectively closed, all these years, to most of Asia. The Golden Door was never equally golden from every direction, and the manifests say so plainly. The biggest rewrite of the island's working life arrived in 1917 over a presidential veto after a quarter century of argument, the literacy test. Every arrival over 16 now had to read, not English, crucially, but any language of their choosing. 30-odd words of ordinary text, printed on small cards the island stocked in dozens of tongues, from Italian to Yiddish to Arabic. Picture the scene that now joined the medical line and the tall desk. Grandfathers in the great hall, spectacles out, reading a few verses aloud in the language of their childhood prayers, very often literally verses, since the test cards drew on familiar passages, while a family held its breath. The test's authors expected it to close the door dramatically. It barely slowed the line. Europe's village schools and synagogue classrooms had done their work, and the overwhelming share of arrivals read their 30 words and walked on. It stands as perhaps the island's strangest monument, a law that accidentally staged 10,000 times a day a public demonstration of how literate the huddled masses actually were. And then, in the 1920s, came the rewriting that ended the era, the quota laws you already know from the Battery Seawall, with their national arithmetic and their consular visas issued an ocean away. But notice, one last time, what all those decades of rulemaking never managed to change. Through every revision, the growing list, the rising tax, the reading cards, the door's fundamental verdict stayed the same. It opened, 98 in 100 over the whole great tide. Congress argued, the rulebook thickened, the inspectors adapted, and morning after morning, the barges kept coming, and the stairs kept filling, and the stamp kept falling, and America kept getting larger, one 2-minute interview at a time. The rules were the door's hinges, always creaking, always adjusted. The door itself was the opening. Let's go back, for a few minutes, to that moment at the inspector's desk when he asked how much money you carry, and then asked to see it. Because behind that question sits the single strangest rule in all of American immigration law, and understanding it will explain half of what you've seen today. Here is the rule, in its full, impossible glory. To be admitted, you must convince the inspector of 2 things at once. First, that you will not become a public charge, that you can support yourself, that you will find work, that America will never have to feed you, and second, that you do not already have a job. Read that again, the way 10,000 baffled arrivals turned it over in their heads. You must be certain to find work, but you must not have found it. A signed contract for employment in America, arranged before you sailed, is grounds for exclusion under the contract labor laws passed in the 1880s after American workers protested the importing of cheap labor by the boatload. But arrive with no prospects at all, no trade, no one to receive you, and you risk the opposite verdict, likely to become a public charge, the most common reason in the books for turning a person away. The gate demands that you walk a tightrope with a confident expression, employable to the marrow, employed not at all. And so the whole ship rehearsed. This is the open secret of the crossing that every memoir will remember. In the bunks at night, in the queues on deck, the veterans coached the first-timers through the catechism. Do you have work waiting? No, sir. But my brother writes that work is plentiful in his trade, and his boarding house has a place for me. It was, very often, a perfectly honest answer delivered with dishonest polish, because of course your brother had spoken to his foreman. Of course a place was half promised in the way of families everywhere. The line between a job waiting and a strong expectation was exactly as wide as the inspector chose to draw it. The law had built a door that could only be passed by people prepared, coached, and confident, and then everyone involved on both sides of the desk quietly agreed to let preparation, coaching, and confidence count as virtues, which, if you think about it, they are. As for the money, no statute of these years names an exact required sum, and that vagueness is its own strange story. The figure everyone on the ship repeats, have $25, they say, $25 and a ticket to where you're going, and they cannot call you a charge, is folklore, a number worn smooth by rumor and by the practice of inspectors who wanted some rule of thumb to hang a judgment on. Families pooled and sewed their funds accordingly. Coins in coat hems, banknotes in shoe linings and bodices, and the hollow heels of boots, so that the asking of the famous question at the desk was often followed by the small comedy of its answering. Half the great hall, at any given hour, discreetly undressing an inch at a time to produce its life savings from the most ingenious places on earth. The inspectors, who had seen everything, waited with the patience of men paid by the year. One more turn of this strange machine, and it is the gentlest one. Suppose the arithmetic failed, the purse too thin, the relative not found, the tightrope wobbling. The island's answer, far more often than the whispered stories allowed, was not the ship home. It was the telegraph. Ellis Island ran on telegrams the way it ran on manifests, wires flying out to Chicago and Pittsburgh and Buffalo. Your brother-in-law says you are expected. Wire $5 and confirmation, and answers flying back within the day. Aid societies stood ready at the rail of every hearing room to post bond for their countrymen, to produce an address, to promise a job that officially was not a job. Money was wired, guarantees were signed, and the likely public charge walked out the door 3 days late into the arms of a family that had just proven by Western Union that the word family meant what it said. The strangest rule in American law was enforced in the end by men who mostly wanted to see it satisfied, and an entire ocean of relatives who made sure it was. Now we come to a set of rules that will sound to modern ears like they belong to another world entirely, because they do. They are the island's rules for women, and nearly every family in this hall is shaped by them somehow. Here is the heart of it. A woman traveling alone, or a mother traveling alone with her children, will not be released from Ellis Island by herself. It does not matter that she has passed the doctors with clear eyes and answered the 29 questions without a stumble. It does not matter that she is 30 years old and has run a farm and buried a parent and crossed an ocean with 3 children and the family's entire funds sewn into her hem. Under the practice of these years, an unaccompanied woman is not landed until someone comes for her, a husband, a father, a brother, an uncle, a properly vouched for fiancé, or until word arrives, verified by that tireless telegraph, that she is expected and provided for at her destination. The official reasoning is protection, and it is not invented from nothing. The newspapers of this decade are full of dark warnings about young women arriving alone and falling into the hands of the wrong men at the docks, swindlers, false employment agents, worse. The matrons of Ellis Island, the uniformed women you saw moving through the great hall, exist for exactly this. They watch over the women's detention quarters, chaperone the waiting, vet the men who arrive making claims. A man who appears at the island announcing himself as a fiancé will be questioned like a suspect and matched like a manifest. Letters produced, photographs compared, the woman asked separately whether she knows him, wants him, wrote to him. The island has seen every fraud there is, and it checks. And this produces, day after day, the most extraordinary scenes on the island, because when the fiance is real and the letters match, and she says yes, that is him, the island still will not simply hand her over to a man she is not married to. So they are married, here, now, on Ellis Island before she ever sets foot on the mainland, by a city official or a clergyman kept close for the purpose, in a plain room, in traveling clothes, with a matron for a witness, and the harbor going about its business outside the window. Thousands of couples, over the years, will begin their American lives exactly this way. A wedding between the medical line and the ferry, the bride carrying a manifest tag for something borrowed, and the groom clutching the boat tickets for the honeymoon, which is to say, the ride to Manhattan. Some of these couples have not seen each other in 5 years. Some, the proxy brides, married by arrangement across the ocean to a man they know from one photograph and a stack of careful letters, are meeting for the first time in their lives, an hour before the wedding, in the presence of the United States government. The old people in your village would call it scandalous. The old people in your village, you reflect, are 3,000 miles away. The children, meanwhile, are subject to the island's most arithmetic-shaped rule. A child under 16, arriving without a parent, enters a special limbo, held, cared for, and released only to a verified relative, with the aid societies and the telegraph once again doing the work of angels. And every mother in the hall performs the same constant census, counting heads by reflex, 1, 2, 3, at the foot of every staircase and the head of every line, because the crowd is a sea and children are small. The island knows this too. It is why lost children at Ellis are found within minutes, passed hand to hand toward the matrons like precious parcels, why the dining hall pours milk for them by the pailful, why on the roof of this very building the government of the United States maintains, of all the things you expected to find at the Golden Door, a playground with swings and slides and a fenced sky, where detained children shriek in 20 languages while their mother's paperwork resolves below. Hold that image a moment, the swings on the roof, between the towers, over the harbor. The rules for women and children were paternal, intrusive, and unmistakably of their century. A woman who had captained her family across the Atlantic was met at the finish line by a government that would not let her walk the last mile alone. But the same rules built the playground and posted the matrons and grilled the false fiancés and married the true ones on the spot. Like everything on this island, the strictness and the tenderness were the same machinery running at the same hour, and most families passed through both without ever being able to say afterward exactly where one ended and the other began. Step out of the immigrant's shoes for a few minutes, you've earned the rest, and look at Ellis Island the way its own workers saw it, because the door you passed through today is also, behind its walls, one of the most remarkable machines in America, a small city whose entire industry is arrival. Count its people first. To process your 5,000 fellow travelers today, the island fields hundreds upon hundreds of employees, at its height, upwards of 500 and more, inspectors and doctors, interpreters and matrons, clerks and stenographers filling the manifest margins, watchmen and gatemen, Cooks and bakers and dishwashers by the platoon, laundry workers steaming mountains of hospital linen, engineers stoking the island's own power plant, boatmen crewing the barges, groundskeepers, telegraphers, a photographer, and, since every city has them, painters and plumbers, and a man whose job is the clocks. They commute to work by ferry like reverse immigrants, morning and evening on the island's own sturdy boat, and they are, taken together, probably the most multilingual workforce ever assembled anywhere. The hiring notices for years sought men and women carrying 2, 3, 5 languages, and the payroll reads like the manifest of the world. Now watch the machine at full steam, because a record day here is a thing its veterans told stories about for the rest of their lives. On the great days of this great year, and one April day of 1907 tops them all, nearly 12,000 arrivals between sunrise and lights out. The island runs like a port, a hospital, a courthouse, and a railway terminal, having the same very long day. Barges stack up at the slips by the dozen. The great hall's lanes are fed and drained in continuous flow. The kitchens turn out meals by the thousands. The money exchange counts the currencies of 40 nations into dollars until the clerk's fingers ache. The telegraph office runs its keys hot with wires to Chicago and Pittsburgh, and the evening ferries and railroad barges drain the day's humanity off to the mainland, just fast enough for tomorrow's ships, already standing in past the Narrows, to fill it all again. The men and women who ran this machine were, by every account including their own, worked half to death in the rush years, and proud of it in the particular way of people who can say, on the day the whole world arrived at once, we landed them all by supper. It was not always an honest machine, and the story of how it became one is worth a bedtime minute. In the island's early years, the concessions that fed and changed money for arrivals fell into the hands of exactly the sort of men you would fear. Short-weighted lunches, mangled exchange rates, tips extorted for services already free, the dockside swindles moved indoors. The cleanup came with the new century, when a reforming president sent a meticulous, incorruptible Wall Street lawyer named William Williams to run the island, and Williams went through it like a spring gale. Crooked concessionaires lost their contracts. Feeding and exchange were put under honest terms and open books, and up went the standing orders you have heard about all night, posted where the staff could not miss them. Immigrants must be treated with kindness and consideration, and any employee failing in this would answer for it, as in a series of salutary firings some did. Watchdogs were even sent through the lines disguised as immigrants, testing the island's manners from inside a shawl. The machine, in other words, was audited for kindness, perhaps the only government facility on Earth, in 1907, formally inspecting itself for gentleness and dismissing people who flunked. And the machine had a memory. Every day's manifests, the great sheets you were checked against, were bound and filed, every hearing transcribed, every telegram logged, every hospital chart kept. The island generated paper the way its power plant generated steam, and it threw almost none of it away. Nobody processing bundle-laden thousands through a Tuesday in 1907 imagined they were building a national treasure. They were just keeping records, the way conscientious clerks do. But that paper, preserved and eventually raised into the light, is why this island became something no one planned. the family album of a third of a nation. The machine's true product, it turned out a century later, was not processed immigrants. It was proof, page and line, name and ship and day, that each of those 12 million ordinary, extraordinary arrivals really happened, really stood here, really walked out the door and into everything that came after. So spare a drowsy thought tonight for the machine's people. The interpreter hoarse, in 5 languages by closing time, the matron on her last round of the dormitories, the cook already soaking tomorrow's oatmeal, the night engineer keeping the lights of the great hall burning over an empty, echoing floor. They came to work by ferry in the morning fog. They landed the whole world by supper, and history mostly forgot to thank them. Let the record show, page this, line this, that they did their jobs, and that the jobs were enormous, and that on the whole, under orders posted plainly on the wall, they did them kindly. Suppose your day did not end at the inspector's desk. Suppose the telegram is still flying west, or grandfather is still with the doctors, or the fiancé's train from Pittsburgh arrives tomorrow, and you are, in the island's patient vocabulary, temporarily detained. About one arrival in 5 spends at least one night here. So let us spend it with them, because their evening holds some of the sweetest strangeness on the island. It begins with supper, and with a fact that surprises nearly everyone who learns it. The meals are free. The government feeds its detained guests at no charge, in a vast steam-clouded dining hall on long tables set for hundreds, and it feeds them with a menu that amounts to a first lesson in the new country. There is beef stew and boiled potatoes. There is rye bread in quantities that reassure every nation present. There is baked fish on Fridays, herring beloved of half of Europe, stewed prunes at breakfast alongside oatmeal and coffee, and milk, endless milk, for the children. After 1911, one corner of the kitchen becomes something remarkable, a kosher kitchen, staffed and certified, serving observant Jewish arrivals, the government of the United States, whose inspectors just grilled you about your funds, also keeping careful track of your dietary law. The portions run large. Veterans of leaner tables go back for seconds and are given them. More than one memoir will record a parent whispering across the table the sentence that will echo down the century. If they feed strangers like this in the waiting room, what must the country be like? And then there are the foods no one has ever seen before. This dining hall is where a whole generation of Europeans meets the banana, handed out in bunches, gleaming and absurd, and the memoirs are full of the same tender comedy, dignified grandmothers biting into the peel, children instructed by winking attendants in the great unzipping, the first taste met with wide eyes up and down the benches. Others meet white sandwich bread here, soft as cake. Some meet ice cream, served on holidays, and conclude reasonably that America has frozen its butter and sweetened it, and that this is a country of lunatics, and that they approve. Decades from now, old men and women will forget the inspectors' faces and the number of their manifest page, but they will remember, with total clarity, the first banana. Memory keeps its own manifest. After supper, the dormitories, long rooms upstairs fitted with iron bunks in tiers, blankets issued at the door, men's quarters and women's quarters, mothers with small children kept together. It is not a hotel, and nobody pretends otherwise. The bunks are narrow, the hall echoes, the harbor light swings across the ceiling all night. But it is warm, and dry and safe, and after steerage it is several memoirs insist, an improvement. The matrons make their rounds. Somewhere down the row, a baby is sung to in Hungarian. The song loses the argument to sleep, verse by verse. Through the tall windows, if your bunk is lucky, you can see the harbor going about its glittering all night business, and the statue, lit and patient, standing over the water like a night nurse with a lamp. And the island fills its guests' waiting days with a strange, touching curriculum. Aid Society teachers hold classes in English and in letters. There are hymn sings and holiday parties. At Christmas, a great tree rises in the registry room itself, and detained children of every faith and nation are handed oranges and small toys beneath it, while a brass band plays carols into that famous echo. On the roof, the playground swings creak over the harbor. None of this makes detention pleasant. Waiting rooms are waiting rooms, and fear does not take holidays. But your descendants, told only the grim version of this island, deserve the whole picture. The same building that could hold a family 3 anxious days also fed them, taught them, doctored them without a bill, and stood a Christmas tree under the vaulted ceiling, trying in its clumsy institutional way to say the sentence the whole place existed to say. You are expected. Hold on, almost there. From the windows of the dormitory, across a narrow channel, you can see the rest of Ellis Island, the part almost no one tonight has mentioned, and the part history most unfairly forgot. 2 more islands, joined to this one by corridors and causeways, built from harbor dredge and dreams of order, and on them one of the great hospitals of the early 20th century. This surprises people, so let it be said plainly. Ellis Island was among everything else a hospital island, hundreds of beds across a campus of wards and pavilions, general hospital on one island, contagious disease wards on the next, with laboratories, operating theaters, kitchens, laundries capable of steaming mountains of linen a day, and a staff of public health service doctors and nurses who saw between them more of humanity than perhaps any medical staff on earth. The chalk marks of the Great Hall mostly led here, and here the 6 second doctors became something else entirely. Unhurried physicians with time, beds, and a budget, treating the travelers of 40 nations for free. The child with the fever spotted on the line, the grandmother whose cough earned a chalked letter, the eyes that needed weeks of treatment before they could pass. They came across the causeway, and the island went to work on making them admissible. That is the detail worth keeping. The hospital's whole purpose, its institutional heartbeat, was not to find reasons to send people back. It was to fix the reason, cure the trachoma, mend the lung, bring down the fever, and then walk the patient back across the causeway to the great hall, stamp the papers, and open the door. And it worked most of the time for most of them. The overwhelming share of those admitted to the wards were eventually admitted to America, discharged healthy, weeks late and years relieved, their families having visited on ferry passes or waited in the boarding houses of the Lower East Side with the lamp lit. Babies were born in these wards, hundreds of them over the years, small citizens arriving mid-arrival, their birthplace forever after a one-word conversation piece, Ellis Island. Nurses taught new mothers in sign language and smiles. Ward kitchens learned to cook for every homeland at once. And the hospital's records fill with the unglamorous daily heroism of fever charts and clean linen. But this channel does not varnish the past, even at bedtime, so it must also be said quietly. Not everyone recovered. Some of the travelers who had survived the leaving and the crossing and the harbor's first sight ended their journey in these wards, a mile short of the mainland, and were mourned by nurses and countrymen who had known them only days. They were not many, against the millions, but each one was somebody's whole world, and the island's registers remember them by name. If your family's story passes through these wards, and many families' stories do, it holds both truths at once, that this was the place of the hardest luck in the whole journey, and that the strangers here fought for its patience and grieved them honestly when the fight was lost. The harbor is quiet out those windows now. Let it hold them kindly, and let us go on. And now, gently, the part of the story you have been braced for all night. The rooms where the answer was no. We will tell it truly, at its true size. Its true size is this: about 2 in every 100. Across the island's great years, roughly 98% of the people who arrived at Ellis Island entered the United States. The whispered dockside legends, the wholesale rejections, the multitudes turned back at the gate were the fears of people risking everything, and fear always overcounts. But 2% of 12 million is still a great many human beings, and their story deserves better than either the legend or a shrug. Most exclusion cases pass through a room upstairs before a board of special inquiry, 3 inspectors at a table, an interpreter, a stenographer taking down every word. It is not a court, no judge, no jury, but it has a court's furniture of fairness in miniature, testimony under oath, witnesses called, relatives summoned from the mainland to vouch and to promise, aid society representatives standing beside their countrymen to argue, and above the board, a real chain of appeal to the commissioner and beyond him to Washington itself. The transcripts survive, thousands of them, and they read like the world's most consequential small claims court, a hearing about a purse, a promise, a cough, a contradiction, with a continent on one side of the scale. More often than not, the machinery bent toward yes. Bonds were posted, telegrams produced the missing brother. The aid societies performed their daily miracles of guarantee. The board, faced with a borderline case and a family in the doorway, found for the doorway. But when it did not, when the medical certificate was final or the law's hard categories closed, then came the hardest walk on the island, back down to the ferry slip, aboard a vessel pointed the wrong way, at the steamship company's expense, toward everything a person had sold, said goodbye to, and sworn never to see again. The saddest cases in the record are the divided families, admissible children, and an excluded parent, or the reverse, standing at the slip doing arithmetic no family should do. Some sent their children forward to the waiting relatives and sailed back alone into a grief the manifest record in a single dry word. It is because of them that the island's own workers coined its double name and meant both halves, the island of hope, the island of tears. Hold both halves tonight, but hold them in proportion. That is all this story asks. For every door that closed, 49 opened. The tears were real, and so was the near universal welcome around them, and the same officials who spoke the hardest sentences spent most of every working day speaking the other one. The commissioner who ran this island through its greatest years posted standing orders that every arrival be treated with kindness and consideration, and dismissed employees who fell short of it. That was the island's own verdict on itself, pinned to its walls in official ink. This is a door, and the people who keep a door are to keep it kindly. 98 times in 100, it swung open, and on the far side of it, someone was waiting, which is exactly where this story goes next. At the far end of the registry room, past the last desk, there is a staircase leading down, and the island's workers, who have seen everything, call it the Stairs of Separation. The name is less ominous than it sounds. At the bottom, the way divides into three, and the three ways are three different Americas. To one side, the passage for those bound west and beyond, toward the railroad ticket office and the ferries to the New Jersey train terminals. To the other side, the way to the ferry for New York City, and in the middle, the corridor back into the island itself for the detained. Ship acquaintances who shared 2 weeks of bunks and rumors part here in 30 seconds, sorted by destination, waving over their shoulders, promising to write. The stairs sort the whole day's thousands like a great patient hand, and at the bottom of them, for the lucky, waits the sweetest spot on the island. It is nothing to look at, a plain iron column at the foot of the stairs, in the crowded space where those waiting for arrivals are allowed to stand. But this is the spot where the watching crowd first meets the descending stream, where the brother who sailed ahead in 1903 catches sight of the sister he has not seen in 4 years, where the husband, 2 years of factory wages folded in his pocket, watches the staircase deliver his wife and a child who has learned to walk since he last looked upon her. The island's staff, who watch this scene repeat 1,000 times a day, long ago gave the column its name, the Kissing Post. Here, the composure that carried whole families across an ocean finally breaks, in the best way. Grown men weep into each other's collars. Grandmothers are lifted off the ground by sons grown broad in American foundries. Couples kiss with a ferocity that makes the matrons look away smiling. Around the post at any given hour swirl a dozen languages of the same sentence. You're here, you're really here. And the sound of it, witnesses agree, is the true sound of Ellis Island, not the roar of the great hall, but this. Some reunions carry small comedies inside them. The husband who has shaved his mustache and must be identified by his laugh. The fiancée studying the man before her against a photograph 5 years old, finding him in there, deciding, you can watch her decide, that the trade of print for flesh is acceptable. The child coached for weeks to greet the papa he cannot remember, hiding instead behind his mother's skirts, while the papa who dreamed of this exact moment through 200 factory shifts crouches down and begins, with terrible tenderness, the long negotiation of being remembered. Give it a week, the matrons could tell him. The week will do what the doorway cannot. And some who descend the stairs are met by no one, not from tragedy, mostly, but from timetables. The brothers' train from Buffalo is late. The address is wrong by 1 digit. The telegram beat its sender. For them, the aid societies keep their vigil at the foot of the stairs, armbands and ledgers and patience, matching the unmet to their futures, one address at a time. Nobody simply wanders from this island into the void. It is not permitted, and more to the point, it is not the custom. The whole apparatus, the post, the matrons, the societies, the waiting crowd itself, which cheerfully adopts strangers and shouts translations across the barrier, exists to finish the crossing properly, with a name called out, a hand on a shoulder, a face that knows your face. The last rule of Ellis Island is unwritten but ironclad. Everyone gets met. There remain only errands between you and America, but they are errands with a century of stories in them, so let us run them properly. First, money. Off the registry room floor waits the official exchange, where the currencies of 40 nations become dollars at posted rates. And that word, posted, is the quiet, scandal ending triumph of the reformed island. Rates displayed plainly, transactions receipted. The exchange operated under federal eyes precisely because the early years taught what happens to tired travelers otherwise. You slide your careful sum across the counter. Lire, marks, rubles, crowns, the worn coins of an old life, and receive back the crisp, strange notes of the new one, greenish and businesslike, and count them slowly, learning the faces of presidents you will vote about someday. It is a small transaction and an enormous one, the last of the old country converted. Then, for most of the day's thousands, the railroad room, because here is a fact that surprises your descendants, who imagine every immigrant pouring into Manhattan. 2 out of 3 people landing at Ellis Island are bound past New York to the mills of Pennsylvania, the packing houses of Chicago, the mines of Ohio and Illinois, the farmlands of the Dakotas, where whole villages from the old country are reassembling themselves on the prairie. In the railroad room, their tickets, many prepaid by relatives, bought in America and mailed across the ocean like paper miracles, are checked and exchanged. Destinations are pinned to coats in yet another round of tagging, so that conductors down the line can steer sleepers to their transfers. And box lunches are sold for the journey, $1 of bread, sausage, apples, and pie, inspected by the same government that inspected you. Ferries carry the westbound straight from the island to the great New Jersey rail terminals, bypassing Manhattan entirely, so that for millions of American families, the famous city of their arrival story was only ever a skyline seen from a ferry rail, glittering and unentered on the way to the train. But your ticket tonight says New York, so yours is the other ferry, the little steamer to the Battery, and the most triumphant boat ride of your life. 30 minutes, standing room, everyone's bundles underfoot, and everyone's eyes ahead. The statue slides by to port, close and unhurried. Gulls escort. The towers of Manhattan come up and up until they fill the sky like a headboard. Around you, people are doing what people do at the ends of great journeys. Nothing mostly. Holding the rail, holding children, holding still, letting it be true. The ferry noses into the slip at the Battery. The gate swings, and then comes the step. One high, ordinary step from deck to gangway to stone that no one aboard will ever forget taking. Mainland America. Under your own feet at last, holding still. What swallows you then is the city, and the city mercifully contains your people. The brother from the kissing post steers you up through the Battery crowds, past the runners and the peddlers, and the astonishing traffic, onto the streetcar or the elevated railway. Your first ride through the air, the city flashing past the windows in layers, toward the neighborhood where the old country keeps a branch office, the block where the signs are in your language, where the grocer stocks the right pickles and the cafe argues the right politics, where the boarding house stairs smell of every dinner you grew up on. There is a table waiting, of course, there is a table waiting. Half the tenement has assembled to inspect you, hear the news from home, and watch you eat. You produce the letters, the photographs, the greetings memorized from a dozen households. You are quizzed, embraced, fed past all argument. Somebody pours something. Somebody proposes your health in the old language, and the little room repeats it. And late that night, on a borrowed bed in a rented room in a roaring city, 3,000 miles and one long day from everything you have ever known, you lie awake exactly as long as it takes to notice the floor. It is not moving. For the first time in 2 weeks, the world under you is holding perfectly, generously, permanently still. Somewhere below, the new country hums. Tomorrow, work and English and everything. Tonight, the stillness holds you like a hand, and you sleep the sleep of the arrived. Now that you are safely landed, come stand on the battery seawall a moment. Look back across the water at the little island with the 4 towers, and let the whole story of that place unspool before and after tonight. Before it was the Golden Door, it was barely anything at all. A 3-acre mudbank the local nations knew as a gull island and oystering ground, and the Dutch called Little Oyster Island, a place for shorebirds, shellfish, and in the harbor's rowdier centuries, the occasional hanging of pirates, which gave it a grimmer nickname best left in the footnotes. A merchant named Samuel Ellis owned it around the time of the Revolution, sold nothing but his name to history, and the little island passed to the government, sprouted a fort and a powder magazine, and dozed through most of a century while the harbor traffic thickened around it. Because the first great door was not here at all. For nearly 40 years before Ellis opened, immigrants landed at Castle Garden, the old round fort on the Battery, millions of them, in an operation run by the state of New York with steadily fraying seams. When the federal government took over immigration, it wanted an island, inspectable, controllable, and beyond the reach of the dockside swindlers. And so Ellis was doubled in size with landfill and ballast, crowned with a grand timber station, and opened on the first day of January, 1892. A 15-year-old girl from County Cork named Annie Moore, traveling with her 2 little brothers to meet their parents in New York, was led first down the gangway, the first of the 12 million, and was presented to her lifelong bemusement with a $10 gold piece for the honor. She settled on the Lower East Side, raised a family, and lived out an ordinary, hard-working American life a few miles from the island that made her famous, which is, if you think about it, the most fitting first story the place could possibly have told. 5 years later, the first Ellis Island burned to the ground in a single June night in 1897, a spectacular fire that consumed the great pine buildings, and mercifully, not one single life, though it took with it irreplaceable stacks of old records. Out of the ashes rose the island you walked tonight, fireproof this time, red brick and limestone, French Renaissance towers, and that cathedral of a registry room, opened in December 1900 and promptly overwhelmed by the greatest decade of immigration in the nation's history. In 1907 alone, this very year of your crossing, more than 1 million people passed through. On the single busiest day that April, nearly 12,000. The vaulted ceiling you stood beneath got its famous herringbone tiles a few years on, after a wartime munitions explosion across the harbor rattled the old plaster down. The repair executed so beautifully that the scar became the island's crown. And then, in the 1920s, the tide was shut off almost overnight. New laws set strict national quotas, and the deeper change moved the inspection itself across the ocean. Visas would now be issued at American consulates abroad, papers checked before the ship ever sailed. The Great Hall's roar faded to echoes within a few seasons. The island lingered on for 3 more decades in quieter, sadder work, mostly detention now, until a November day in 1954 when officials processed one last detainee, a Norwegian seaman, locked the doors, and left the golden door to the gulls and the weather. For 30 years, the registry room stood open to pigeons and peeling paint, saplings in the corridors, the kissing post gathering dust, until the country remembered in time for the statue's centennial what it had in the harbor. The Great Restoration of the 1980s raised the building back to its 1907 glory, the very year you saw it, and in 1990 the doors opened again, this time to the descendants, a museum of the 12 million in the rooms where it happened, with the manifests digitized and searchable so that the great-great-granddaughter we spoke of earlier could find your page and your line from her kitchen table. They come by the millions every year now, riding the same ferry route you rode, climbing the same stairs, walking slower than you did, and looking up. We have busted myths all night as we went, but the island's legend is so thick with them that it deserves one last gentle sweep before sleep, the whole catalog of what Ellis Island wasn't. It wasn't the place your name was changed. You know this one now, and you know the better story hiding behind it. The manifests took your name across in your family's own spelling, and the changes came later, on American soil, out of American pressures and American choices, at shop counters and schoolyards and citizenship desks, over years, by degrees, and mostly by your own family's hand. The old name was never lost. It is sitting in the archive tonight, on its page and line, waiting to be looked up. It wasn't a wall. The numbers are worth repeating one last time because the legend gets them exactly backward. About 98 of every 100 who reached the island entered America, most of them within a few hours, 3 to 5 hours, door to ferry on an ordinary day. The fearsome examinations you braced for all night lasted for most people 6 seconds and 2 minutes respectively. The Island of Tears was real, and we have honored it truly, but it was 2% of the story, and the other 98% was a door, swinging open 5,000 times a day. It wasn't everyone's door. Your descendants will come to imagine that every American immigrant walked the Great Hall, but the hall belonged mostly to steerage, mostly to Europe, mostly to one 30-year tide. The cabin classes stepped straight onto Manhattan piers. Other oceans had other doors. Angel Island in San Francisco Bay, with its own harder story. Boston, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New Orleans, Galveston, the land crossings from Canada and Mexico, and millions of Americans' ancestors came long before any of it existed, or came in chains through doors that deserve their own nights and their own telling. Ellis is one great chapter of the American arrival story. It never was the whole book. It wasn't heartless. This may be the deepest correction of all, because the popular picture, cold bureaucrats, cattle pen railings, contempt stamped on every form, misses what the record actually shows. The interpreters hired precisely so you would be understood. The standing orders for kindness and consideration, enforced by dismissal, the free meals and the kosher kitchen, the hospital that existed to cure people into admissibility, the matrons and the weddings and the rooftop playground, the telegraph running all day on family devotion, the aid societies at every elbow. It was a bureaucracy, and it could be brusque, and its rules were the prejudices of its age. The record shows that plainly, too, and this channel won't pretend otherwise. But the human beings inside the machine spent most of every day helping people through it, and the people they helped seek interviewed decades later remembered kindness far more often than cruelty. The doorkeepers, on the whole, kept the door kindly, and it wasn't the end of anything. The island processed arrivals, not Americans. The becoming happened afterward in the tenements and mill towns and prairie townships over decades of work and night school and children who dreamed in English, which is why the truest monument on the island today isn't a plaque or a statue. It's the wall of names along the seawall, hundreds of thousands of them, in every spelling from every shore, facing the harbor, and the crowds who come to run their fingers along the letters, looking for the one that started everything. Nearly half the country by descent traces a line through those 3 acres of harbor landfill. Not bad for a gull island. So come back one last time to that rented room above the roaring street, where you are lying in the dark on your first American night, and the floor is holding beautifully still. The sounds through the window are all new, and all, somehow, already familiar. The streetcar's bell, the late peddler, the neighbor's fiddle finding an old tune from home and dressing it in new time, laughter in 2 languages on the stoop below. On the chair beside the bed, your coat, and pinned to it still, because you could not quite bring yourself to remove it, the little manifest tag, soft with handling, your ship, your page, your line. Tomorrow you will fold it into the envelope with the letters and the photographs, where it will outlive the coat, and the room, and the century. Let the day drift past you once more, unhurried now, all its terrors diffused into stories. The rail at dawn, and the green statue turning toward you. The stairs that were secretly an examination, and the doctors who read you in 6 seconds and found nothing to write. The eye men, and the smile you smiled when they nodded. The tall desk, the 29 questions, the interpreter handing you welcome to America in your own mother's tongue, the name that no one changed, the money unstitched from a hem in front of a patient stranger, the kissing post, and the collar you wept into, and the meal you were fed past all argument, and the toast in the old language repeated by the little room. You did it. It is done. Of all the sentences in all the languages of the great hall today, that one is yours now, forever. You are here, and as sleep comes up around you, like a tide around a little island, let the picture widen one last time, because tonight, all over this city, all over this country, thousands of others who stood in your line today are lying down for their own first American night, in boarding houses and cousins' parlors, in railroad sleepers rocking west across New Jersey and Ohio toward the mills and the prairies, each with a tag in an envelope and a name intact and a life ahead. 12 million first nights over the years, 12 million rooms gone quiet like this one, 12 million pairs of eyes closing on the same enormous thought. Tomorrow, it begins. Every one of them a beginning. Every one of them, somewhere down the decades, a family telling the story at dinner, getting the name part charmingly wrong, and a descendant, some quiet night, sailing past a green statue on a party boat and feeling without quite knowing why that the harbor remembers her. It does. Sleep now. The floor will hold still all night. The lamp is out, the city hums its long welcome, and the little island rides at anchor in the dark harbor behind you, lit and patient, keeping the door. Thank you for making the crossing with us tonight. If you drifted off somewhere between the Narrows and the Kissing Post, that is exactly as it should be. The island will still be here tomorrow, and so will all our other journeys, waiting in the Drowsy History Library whenever you need them. Good night from the harbor. May your papers always be in order, your table always be waiting, and your name always be spelled exactly the way your grandmother spelled it. Rest easy, sleep well. This is Drowsy History.